All right, g'day, hi, and welcome. I guess you would call this like kind of like a bit of a part two of the Nikon D100 in 2020. Now, some of these photos are a couple of years old. This 2018. My 18 to 70 mm lens on this one. Peter nearly flipped her on that one. And again, I got some car show stuff in here. I've done car shows. I've done weddings. I've done that. I can't really show you the wedding stuff because it's, that's a little bit different. It's friends and family, and then just people that kind of want that more confidential. But the mud run stuff, yeah, that's fair game. Yeah, but you can see the colors I got here are pretty good. Now, mind you, most of the car show stuff is in auto. There's not a lot of creative photography going on there. And near the end of the video, you'll see some of my older, like from 2003 when I first got the camera, the photos back then. Now, some of the mistakes I made back in 2003 while I was learning was, shooting with too high of an ISO and stuff like that. But you get the idea, like the detail that these cameras will, get with, your average lens. So older cameras are not necessarily completely outgunned to the point where it's like, oh, well, it's 6.1 megapixels, therefore it's just absolutely no good anymore. It was phenomenal back in the day, but because there's, a gazillion megapixels now, therefore it's no longer relevant. Well, yes and no. One of the things is that I was saying in the last video, here comes Mitch Hansen. These are great shots. Hey, he's getting kind of close. You know what I mean? This next shot's one of my favorite shots ever. Can you guess what the next shot's going to look like? Just take a wild guess. Yeah, he's upside down. Hey, it's okay. Mitch was okay. He nearly killed me, but he was okay. The thing was coming straight for me. But it was a good day. It was a good mud run. But even capture the dust, everything like that. There's a lot of character. These are unedited photos too. Like they're not, they're not edited at all. So you get the idea of what the cameras can still produce. And the thing that I really liked about the D100 was that it became a bit of a. We look back on it now, it's kind of the first of its kind. It's not the first digital camera. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's the first digital camera that kind of really challenged film cameras. Because when I started with the digital photography thing, I've always wanted to do photography when I was younger, and when I started with the digital photography thing, it was like the real photographers still used film because it was sharper and it was better and this and this and this and this, and it was digital wasn't there. Kodak had made a digital camera, and it was like $12,000, and it was like 1.5 megapixels, and I mean, would be completely unusable by today. Like cell phones take better pictures than that. I don't think there's any 1 megapixel cameras out there. But for its standard, it was what it was. But the thing is that for the digital really worked for, like, say, press photographers, where you could get a shot, email it out to your newspaper, and I did that too, although I never got anything published in the newspapers. But you could have your shot sent out to the newspaper in like record time, where somebody's sitting in a dark room somewhere trying to get their daily shots ready for the newspaper. It was you know what I mean, like it just you just couldn't compete with that. So, but there was a resistance to it. Right now, the resistance is DSLRs versus mirrorless cameras. Now, everybody says, mirrorless cameras wave of the future. Well, they got two major problems with mirrorless. Number one, battery consumption. Number two, the viewfinder lag. Those are the two things that people, if they can find a way to solve those two issues, then yeah, I guess you could say the shutter, will be bygone era. But I mean, I'd rather look through a viewfinder and see. Whoop, how did that one get blurry? Sorry, I shouldn't have put that one in there. But you would see, an absolutely, natural image through the viewfinder versus looking at a tiny screen, and something that you have to wait to turn on to get the shot. Where with something like a D100, it was the second you pretty much have the camera on, it'll go click. Like it's just, there's no wait time. It's just like a film camera in that sense. So that's one of the things the D100 brought to the table, and of course it's superior to the D100 or the D1. The D1 and the D100, like the D100 was the top of the food chain for enthusiast cameras. You know what I mean? And then of course, Canon had its Rebel and whatever, and that was the other. But the D100 really set the bar high for digital cameras. Everything after that had to be better. And, obviously nowadays you got like ridiculous like 50 megapixel cameras. I mean, a cheap camera now is like 16 to 20 megapixels. You know what I mean? But you couldn't do that back then because after 8 megapixels, everything became so pixely. It just became so grainy it was unusable. But they've solved a lot of the sensor. They've improved on the sensors so that they can get more in there now. And then, of course, the ultimate is a full-frame camera or a medium format, but not everybody can afford that. So these crop sensor cameras are still pretty good. I mean, these are again, this is just walking around. All the car shots are just pretty much in auto, but you can get the idea of what you can do with I just have 2 lenses. That's all I have. Now, I do plan on getting some good quality prime lens. I always wanted a 60mm macro. I want to get a good 35, a good 50, and those are always going to give you the best, but you have to be able to control your environment to use those kind of lenses and get away with it. But one of the things is when I printed out the pictures from the D100 the first time, I went into, it used to be called Black's Photography. I don't think they're around anymore anywhere, but I walked into the store and I said, here's a CD. I want to print these out on like your 4-inch by 6-inch, photographs, right? After this car picture, we go back to 2003 in my pictures. And I printed these out, and they were sharper than most film cameras at the time. Like, it was really, really good. I mean, this is like the first kind of runs with this camera back in 2003. Again, ISO a little too high, but you look at the detail. And that's my 70-300 lens in the macro feature. It was just, when I printed everything out, I was just like, film is dead. I mean, film's not dead, so to speak, but it's a bygone era. Like, that's now an enthusiast thing. Film is no longer something that is practical, right? And I know that offends some people, but like in reality, everybody's going to be using digital from this point on until, I don't know what goes beyond digital, but that's what we're going to get. So, I learned a lot with this camera, early on, and I did I got another one of those blurry photos. I should have really, don't mind the blur. I thought that, okay, it's not that bad. Okay. But the point is that it set the bench high for digital cameras, really high. Again, these are not doctored in any way. That's what comes out of the camera naturally. And that's still pretty good for 6.1 megapixels. That's still pretty darn good. When you want to use this camera for, say, stock photography, this is where you run into the problem. You have to shoot it on the biggest resolution, and the problem you run into is sometimes it's still not even big enough. That's me back in 2003, a little less gray. This next shot's really nice. Like, I mean, that's 2003. That's what I got back then. You can still produce that now. Again, I had my ISOs up a little too high, but those are nice shots. The detail's great. So the point I'm making is, yes, these cameras are still relevant. Where they're going to lag is in, if you want to sell your prints online, you might, some stock photographies might say, agencies might just like say that it's not, the pictures are not big enough to be able to market them. So you'll run into that problem. But if you're going to take pictures of weddings or whatever, again, is it the sharpest camera in the world? No. Is it sharp enough? Yes. You can do really good photography with these cameras. It's amazing the benchmark that it actually set. So I guess, yeah, this video is going to wrap up fairly soon. And I want to keep them kind of short anyway, but don't discount older cameras. Now, if you're a videographer, I mean, I've kind of traded the shutter for the video in the last past, being more of a YouTuber or whatever, and I haven't been, keeping up on my skills of photography as much as I should have. But one thing I will say is that one of the things that is nice is that 17 years down the road, it's a camera that I can still pick up and still do stuff with. Like, it's not like other digital cameras where it's just like it's not even worth turning those things on anymore. Like, they're just so so unusable. So Nikon built, not only did they build a freight train of a camera, I mean, these things are magnesium body. Yeah, I mean, you could defend yourself against a bear with it. You know what I mean? But yet again, you got all these lenses that you can still find, and you can find these cameras if you're just into it for the photography angle. If you're into it for all-around social media stuff like that with video, no, these cameras don't have video on them. But yeah, Nikon D100 is, people won't see what they're worth right now because electronics don't hold that much value over time. But once people start going and say, well, what was the camera that really, set the bar really high for the digital world, that said, yes, we are going to go head to head with film cameras? Well, it was the D100 and I guess the Rebel EOS 1 or whatever it was. Those two cameras were definitely the top, but the D100 I think was just slightly had the edge on the other one. I don't know, it was splitting hairs to say, because I didn't know if I was going to go with a Canon or if I was going to go with a Nikon. I ended up becoming a Nikon snob, and I like Nikon. I mean, Nikon, the research and development is absolutely phenomenal. What they're able to do. Their crappiest DSLR camera they have right now, I guess, is the beginner model, is the D3500. And that thing is like 16 or 20 megapixels, and it, like 8 frames a second or something like that. This thing did 4 to 6. Then the D300 came along and it did an incredible 12 frames a second. Now I know the mirrorless can do, like, some of them do up to 60 frames a second. Different animal, different time. I'm not anti-mirrorless camera. I'm not one of those guys that look at technology and get really rooted in it, kind of like how the film photographers were towards digital in the beginning. But now people see the writing on the wall. Like there's almost no place to get your photos developed anyway. You have to mail them out and whatever. So it's just film cameras will always have a special place amongst the enthusiasts. But as a working photographer, yeah, you're obviously going to stick with digital. I mean, we've been digital for 20 years now, and that last 17 years of the 20 years has just been like a skyrocket in technology. So yeah, the D100, if you can get one of these things for cheap, obviously they were a good enough. They've become a timeless camera because they were built well. Now my battery is starting to, after 17 years, it's starting to get a little bit weak. And my pixels are starting to, I'm starting to get a few dead pixels in the sensor. But you have to understand, this very camera has well over 130,000 shots on it. I mean, I use this thing almost on a daily basis. Like I said, I did weddings, I did car shows, I did a model shoot, and then just walking around with it all the time kind of gave me a bit of the ability to just, like, especially when you first get these cameras, you just hold down the button, click, 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 and, put the autofocus on and just click, 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 because it makes you feel like, makes you feel important, right, or whatever. But I remember one thing about this camera, and I'll just end on this. Back in the day, if you were walking around with a Nikon D100 around your neck, or a D1, or something like that, people are like, oh wow, nice camera. You know what I mean? Like, it was an impressive camera to have. It really was a bit of a status symbol, in the sense of that it was a camera that if you had it, it meant you were probably somebody serious about photography. Wasn't always the case. Some people, one of the things that was, the photographers before, the digital revolution of cameras, is that they would always, like, film camera, you had to commit to it. Like, every time you used the camera, it cost you money. Like every shot was, dollars and cents. Where digital wasn't like that. You had the do-over button on a digital, right? And so suddenly overnight, we go from a handful of people around the world being professional photographers to about 2 billion people calling themselves photographers, right? And yeah, there's all that. So that's what the digital stuff did, but the digital was still not quite there until you get to this camera and its Canon equivalent. And like I say, when you printed out these photos, if you were, it's the film equivalent of this would have been the F100, I believe. And people compared them, and I remember looking at websites, and they were like, they had a way to scan the film photo and put it on, side by side to the D100, and it was close. You could still tell that the film camera was still a tad bit sharper, a tad bit brighter, whatever, but it was so close at that point. And now, a few camera models later, it had surpassed film, and now like film is like like you can take. It's not that you could just take a photo and have it being sharper. It's the fact that you could take a photo and blow it up to like infinity so easily in comparison to film. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about this camera. And again, I think it'll go down in history as the camera that really set the benchmark. That's my opinion. Maybe people will disagree, but I'll leave it at about that, because I can just go on forever and a day on this camera. So old technology, yes, and I do need to upgrade, because I've kind of sat on the sidelines with my camera for a little while. I'd say, I think the last wedding I did was my cousin's. And got some great shots out of it, but I was getting to the point where it's like I'm starting to question whether the camera is going to make it through the day or not, type of thing. Although it has no hints of slowing down, the shutter is getting a little bit tired. So when I turn the camera on side, sometimes the shutter will stick, like it's getting weak. So these cameras were rated for about 125,000 shots or whatever, and I know I'm well over that. I just know, because I used to do like 700-800 shots, every time I'd go out. You do this 100 days in a row, a couple of years in a row, you're gonna, like, this camera is well used. It's well used. It owes me nothing. I don't regret paying full price for it back in the day, but it was an expensive camera back in the day. I think the body alone was $1,600 or $2,000 or whatever. I did a video on that. I still have the receipts and stuff like that, but I had a lot invested in this camera, and I went through a bunch of lenses, and the lenses that I stayed on for zooms was my 70-300 and my 18-70, which basically I've got from 18 millimeter all the way up to 300 plus a macro feature covered. So that's two lenses that kind of do everything, and that's 18-70 mil really does a lot. It's not the best lens in the world, but the 18-70 mil is a good lens. It's a pretty good lens. You can see some of the stuff. Now, some of the old photography, I don't know what lenses I had at the time. I know I had a 24-35. I had a 35-50. And a few other ones that I probably forgot about. And, I would upgrade lenses every now and then. But if you do get one of these old cameras and you can, find some, like I say, you can get some of the new lenses, it probably won't run them fully, but it'll probably, like, you can run the VR lenses, the vibration reduction lenses, and obviously the autofocus, autofocus VR lenses. You can run those. I mean, so, and then of course, if you just want to run in manual mode, you can buy the old lenses from the 70s and 80s and whatever, and use those. So yeah, great camera. So yeah. I will get another camera. The cameras I would like to have, if money were no object, obviously I'd want one of the big boy cameras like the D750 or the D850, something like that. If money was absolutely no object, I'd probably, obviously their flagship would be what I'd go with. But that said, do you need that much camera? I mean, really, when I compare to the newer cameras now, what they have versus what this has, and what I use in an actual, like this camera, you can go fully manual with. And if you were doing it that way, there's so much you don't need on the camera. You know what I mean? If you have editing software, well, if you want to do effects, well, a lot of cameras now, that's what you're paying the extra for, is these little effects that you can get in there. You know, the editing you can actually do on the camera. Well, this camera you can't really do any editing on, but you know, like you can basically use this camera, you know, like just do the photography and then you can edit, you know, on your computer after. But if you're going to go with an older camera like this, like I say, you might get it for a fantastic deal and you can invest in the lenses, but try to get lenses that you can use with newer cameras eventually. So as a backup camera, I don't know if I would want to use it as a backup camera if you were a pro, because of the age of it, unless you knew it was just going to be the iron. Like, this thing's a workhorse and a half. It's never let me down ever. But you know, at some point it's kind of like, you know, quit while you're ahead. So that's what happens with these older cameras. But if you're just using it as an enthusiast and you're not on the job, yeah, it's a great camera. Again, stock photography, this is where the 6.1 megapixels kind of fall short, you know, and stuff like that. But I still use the camera, and some photos do get approved. So I do need to go bigger. I need to that type of thing. But one nice thing about it is it doesn't fill up your hard drive very quickly, because the photos are still pretty small. But you can see the type of photos you can get out of it. So yeah, I'm sure you're going to get your pro photographer come in and look at it and say, oh, that photo's bad, that photo's bad, that photo's bad, and stuff like that. And yes, you can find, like, especially on the older stuff when I was shooting too high of ISO, you can find problems with any camera, whatever. But if you look at it just for what it is, it still holds up pretty well by today's standard. If you were to want to take a family portrait with this, and let's say you got a nice 60 millimeter, you know, portrait lens, or an 85 millimeter portrait lens, really like top quality glass on this thing, even if it was a used lens, you'll produce posters, whatever, with this camera that, you know, again, you know, will just, you know, move people's emotions because they'll be so happy with what they've got. So yeah, great camera. Even in 2020, I still like this camera, but you know, I do want to kind of give it a bit of a break and get something newer. Yeah, so that's, I guess that's all I'm going to say about it. It's a great camera. If you can find one used, you know, it's a great enthusiast camera. If you're on the cheap and you don't know if you're going to like photography or not, this would be a great camera to start with. Especially at this, you know, like, you can get these things for under $100 now. If you can find one with a couple of lenses, you know, take a photography course with it, I would do it. You know, like, you know, unless the course required you to have a more advanced camera, whatever. But if you're just going for the basics of photography in manual mode, this does more than you can imagine. And again, that older technology, sometimes less is more, right? But yeah, there we go. So I'll keep updating you on how this camera performs, and especially with everybody, you know, with what's going on in the world with now, everybody in the lockdown. Maybe I'll start doing some indoor photography because it's winter now anyway. So, and that might just might be a fun way to spend the winter, you know, just exploring what I can do with this, and maybe if I could pick up a lens or two. A couple of prime lenses. If I can get a good macro lens, I'd have a lot of fun, a lot more fun. Indoor photography, you need really good low light lenses, and this camera's not bad. With the best lens I had in low light was a 50 mil. It was a 1.4 or 1.8. I don't remember what it was. It might have been a Tamron. I don't remember what it was. All I remember is it did really well in low light. I don't know why I got rid of it. I think it had a scratch on it. Other than that, it was like a really sharp, clean lens. And all that, and then of course, you know, the two lenses I have are really, like I say, 18 millimeters right out to 300 between two lenses, and the dividing line is at the 70 mil mark. Plus I have a macro feature. It's all photography that you can imagine, right? It's not a specialty. So, but that said, I can do weddings, I could do, you know, car shows, I could do, you know, just about anything I want to do with it. So anyway, I'm going on a bit long now. I apologize for that. I wanted to keep the video short, but I'll show you as much photography as I can throughout this, from new, old, but this camera's still going. on the original battery. So I don't know how long that's going to last, but yeah, if you can find one of these cameras, pick them up. You know, it's a great camera. It's 17 years later, and it's still a fun camera to use. All right. Anyway, have yourselves a great day.